Welcome to the lABLEd podcast, a show about disability, illness and difference.
And history.
I'm Lucy.
And I'm Alice.
I'm Daisy.
So much more than what you see. We all live our lives differently. Kaleidoscope identity. And this is who I'm meant to be. I'm just labelled me. I'm just labelled me.
In this episode, along with Lucy crying and Alice swearing, there's going to be a number of historical terms for disability that are now considered extremely offensive.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the lABLEd podcast with me and Lucy. And this episode, I've been told off for calling her our tame historian. So I was thinking perhaps rabid academic Daisy is here.
Hi, Daisy!
Hi. It has to be rabid to some extent for me to be allowed anywhere near the word academic.
That is the one thing that we've learned.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
you can say
good,
whatever you
thank you.
want.
I've got a different setup in here for the microphone, the desk and everything so that I can more easily frantically Google anything you ask me.
Fabulous.
Brilliant.
Look, she does do prep, ladies and gents. She does do prep, but there are times where she goes, I didn't check. I've not Googled that because I didn't know you were going to ask that question. So now we can ask Daisy anything.
Absolutely. I mean, you do ask very questions that I would not have thought of.
Weird questions.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
that's
What-
the nice way of saying Daisy's like, I don't know what's going on in your head.
Oh, what was that 18th century guy's favourite animal? I don't know.
Why are you even thinking about that, girls? Like, you have not a clue.
Like, yeah, I'm sure there is an answer. What do you want me to do about it? Like,
Can I just say, Daisy, in between the last time we spoke, so the last time we spoke was we did the history of autism episode, and this episode, I occasionally come across your tweets on Twitter, and every single one of them makes me laugh out loud. And my mum now goes, Daisy again. Yes, Kate, yes. So I am a proper fangirl, I think. I might just get a t-shirt that says I love Daisy on it.
I would not be opposed to that.
There we go. We'll get you your merch available.
It's when your name is a flower, it is quite easy. My sister used to buy me what she determined self-captioning clothes.
Right.
It's just if she saw a t-shirt that just had a load of daisies on it. So there you go.
That's yours.
Yep.
I suppose it saves you on kind of introductions. You can just like point at yourself and be like,
Yeah, just point at my chest. And...
that could be very confusing. People call you Daisy or just boobs. You
Yeah.
like that boobs girl? She's really weird. Who likes history?
We've got another history episode today, haven't we?
We
Alice.
have. We're doing a story swap history lesson, like the Rosa and Sarah one that we did a million years ago. It feels like now.
Which went down very well.
If we do say so ourselves.
If we do say so ourselves. Go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say sort of what we're doing today. So this is one where I'm going to tell Lucy's story. Lucy's going to tell me a story. Daisy's going to listen and tell us when we're wrong.
Or just add little bits in.
So I'm going first this week because...
Strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I'm going first this week, partly because Lucy went first last time. And I'm doing... mine's just a little bit rough, guys.
Yeah.
So...
We're going to have to put a content warning on this, aren't we?
Yes, I've got notes for trigger warnings and stuff, guys, because I will be telling you about the life of Rosemary Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
So is everybody strapped in, ready to go?
Yeah, I've got my, yep. I've prepared myself for this squeamish feeling I'm going to be feeling in about 15 minutes, probably.
So Rosemary Kennedy, known as Rosemary throughout her life, was born in September 1918 during the Spanish flu epidemic in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, something that we're all probably quite familiar with, that kind of feeling, you know, living in our own pandemic.
Yes.
She was the third child and first daughter of Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy and Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. Those names tell you a lot about the kind of family that she was born into.
Mhm.
So yeah, be prepared for that. The doctor who was supposed to attend Rosemary's birth was delayed because of the demands of all the other patients during the epidemic. And so Rosemary's mum, was told not to push, and apparently Rosemary's birth was delayed by 2 hours.
Whoa.
Supposedly, she wasn't just told not to push. The baby started coming out, and she was told to press her legs together to stop it.
What? I didn't think that even worked. Did that work?
I'm pretty sure it, like...
That's like saying cross your legs when you need a wee, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've never had a baby, so I haven't had the opportunity to test this.
Yeah.
Just based on logic and a few films, I don't think that would work.
No.
Yeah, so people think that when this leg togetherness caused Rosemary to be deprived of oxygen, and that is potentially what caused her cognitive impairments later in life.
Right. Okay. All right.
Rosemary began missing the usual kind of milestones in her childhood, taking longer to learn to walk and talk and read than her older brothers, who were Joe Jr. and the future president, John Jack Kennedy. Throughout her life, Rosemary's mum would complain about her daughter's poor coordination and difficulty keeping up with how sporty and physically active the rest of the family were.
Right.
The Kennedys were an affluent and powerful family, both politically and socially. Rose's father had been a politician, and her husband, Joe Sr., would go on to be the US ambassador to the United Kingdom in the 1930s. Rose and Joe Sr. would go on to have 9 children in total.
Whoa.
Yep. And out of their offspring, they'd end up with 2 senators, a duchess, and a president.
I mean, that's good going, isn't it, really, to be fair?
The family of high achievers, I think.
Yeah.
It's safe to say.
And a familial dynasty that still goes on to this day in America.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were really considered to be the pinnacle of Irish Catholics, immigrants sort of success.
Mm-hmm.
They had a lot of money.
Were they like the poster people for?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were celebrities. They were in the press. They were I've got words like stylish, popular, ambitious. Seems like anything they decided to work towards, they would achieve.
Right.
Their children.
So they are like the American dream personified.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. And they still are, I think, in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
The children all went to fancy pants private Catholic schools and mixed with the political and social elite of the time.
Of course.
A lot of pressure from mum and dad to maintain kind of these really high standards and reputation of the family. And it's clear from the stuff that I read that none of that was subtle. Books and letters written by the Kennedy kids, the children when they were both kids and adults, that their parents were openly pressuring them and had no problems with admonishing them for not meeting their expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously having a daughter with developmental delay threw quite a spanner in the works.
Yeah.
I have a lovely quote from Joe Sr. saying, "I don't know what it is that makes 8 children shine like a dollar coin and another one dull."
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Cheers, Dad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So basically that was their feelings about Rosemary her entire life.
It is worth noting that they did keep her at home and cared for her there, and they still took her out to, social functions and things like that, which wasn't, I mean...
They didn't want to institutionalize her.
Yes. The implication often of the things you read is that that's particularly rare. Obviously, it wasn't, as rare in poorer people, but in people of their standing, I think it probably was quite rare for them to not only keep her at home, but also, take her out places. But apparently she was, people really loved her because she was so happy.
I think part of my thing with what I've read though is that they weren't doing that because they thought it would be good for Rosemary. They were doing that because they couldn't have their reputation couldn't deal with having a daughter who was institutionalized. Like they were just not having that.
Do you think Daisy was a bit of half and half?
Yeah. There were certainly elements of both. You know, they can try and play happy families, but at the same time, there was no hiding it really. And you know, if they'd wanted to put her into an institution from birth, they would not have been the only ones of their standing. It wouldn't have been an uncommon thing. And
you have to look at the royal family, don't you, really? They have a long history of keeping people hidden in a way. To know that it does go on.
And as we know from later in her life, they didn't have an issue with it, but that's what Alice will get to, I'm sure.
I mean, my personal feelings are like they kept her at home, but it wasn't because they accepted her. No. They spent her childhood trying to fix her. So it really started being an issue for them when so Rosemary was the first daughter, then there was another two, Kathleen and Eunice, and both of them had surpassed her in like kindergarten and gone up onto like later primary education, and Rosemary was still being held back. So they took her out of this like the fancy pants school that she was at and sent her to a more sort of private, not private as in I mean it was privately funded, but quiet, less prestigious and well-known school. And this would be the first of many moves for Rosemary. She ended up going to 5 different schools, not to mention a bunch of summer camps and like out of term classes and stuff like that.
Just and summer camps.
But it was all about trying to treat her. So they were like, right. Oh, maybe this teaching style will make her learn and this will make her perform better and things like that. So
right. Did any of them work? Do we know?
There's one that I'm going to come on to talk about a little bit later. One of the things, like, so talking about her, they're wanting to keep her at home and, taking her out to places. One of the things that was really clear from my reading is that there was an element of denial about it. So they wouldn't tell the like educators and stuff about Rosemary's needs. So there's one story, the last summer camp that Rosemary went to before what happened to her in 1941, was she was sent to this summer camp, and the people who like ran it were expecting her to be like a camp counselor, to be there to like support the teenage kids and do stuff with the young kids. And they knew that she was being sent with like a companion, but I guess they thought she's a Kennedy, maybe it's like a maid or something. But when Rosemary got there, it was clear that basically the companion was there to supervise Rosemary at all times, and that Rosemary needed as much like emotional and practical support as the kids. Like she didn't have the ability. She couldn't have,
Don't you think that like the parents, by not disclosing her needs, I mean, I know it can be very controversial sometimes, but not disclosing at least the basic needs that she might need, they're setting her up to fail anyway?
I mean, beyond that, for me, like it goes into a safety issue. Like some of the stuff, there's a story about how she needed orthotics in her shoes, and they didn't tell the place that she was staying at that she needed to be reminded and helped to put those in her shoes. And so it wasn't until and she didn't say anything because she'd been taught not to like kick up a fuss. And so it wasn't until they saw her feet bleeding because her shoes weren't fitting properly.
Oh, God.
And it's just, her parents just didn't think to tell people that she might need that extra support. And so it was her that suffered.
I suppose in this day and age, we are, there's no shame in mobility aids and all that kind of thing. And it takes a lot of coming to terms with. But I suppose back then, there is this kind of, everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be,
Certainly for the Kennedy family.
Yeah, exactly. With that status comes that level of nothing's wrong, everything's fine. This makes me sad.
This is a sad story. There's a lot of debate about what was actually quote unquote wrong with Rosemary. Some people said that she was dyslexic and that she had reportedly a low IQ, for whatever that's worth. I don't think IQ tests are worth much particularly.
No.
Other people believe it was like a more complex learning difficulty or cognitive impairment. And more recently, there's been an argument that she actually might have had a mental illness, something like a depressive disorder, because she had a lot of mood swings. But whatever it was, in all the books that I read, and, you know, even her family throughout her entire life called her mentally retarded, which I put in very heavy quotes.
That's a lovely phrase,
isn't it lovely?
But it was a medical, a medical term.
Was it?
For this sort of thing. Yeah. It's this is why most of the things that I write about disability history, every single one of them has a content warning.
Yeah.
For what I call, quote, historical terms for disability.
Yeah.
Like, it's obviously we would never say that now, because it's such a horrible term, but then it would have been what the doctors were telling them.
Do you ever find yourself, Daisy, when you're writing and like wincing, as if I really don't know, do I really need to write this down, or are you a bit more, it is what it is, it was what it was?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do get uncomfortable with it, but I know that I do still have to do it.
Yeah,
I think it's important to do it as well.
Yeah,
I think not to sort of,
you can't sugarcoat it, can you? Really?
No.
Yeah, like particularly with photos of things that contain those sorts of words, because obviously so when I put pictures of disability history related things onto my Instagram, then it's you can't rely on someone reading the words of you kind of explaining that no, this is a historical term, this isn't what I'm calling it, and all of that. Yeah, but then I realized that there were points when I was kind of sitting there going, should I post this image or not? And then going, well, hang on a minute, no, that is, I can't just not acknowledge that these terms were used. I ended up writing a sort of like glossary of disability history language and kind of where things come from and what they used to mean, and so it would be terms like that, like retardation and things like that. That was kind of, this was a medical term, now obviously we don't use it because of this, but also like the origins of words like invalid, which I see a lot of people get they really don't like now. A lot of these terms have a lot of like confusing background that you don't understand. So like there's a place in London called Cripplegate.
Yes.
And there's this been debate for decades, which is why is it called Cripplegate? Does it come from a word which is actually unrelated, just sounds a bit like cripple, or was it because there was a hospital there that was dealing with a lot of disabled people, or was it just that there were some cripples nearby once? Or, there's so many reasons why these things are called anything that it's really difficult to tear it all apart.
That fascinates me. Anyway, Alice, carry on.
Back to Rosemary.
Yes, sorry.
So
we have to keep it light because we know what's coming. It's like
I'm going to tell you a little bit about who Rosemary was as a person, because a lot of, if you read the kind of surface stuff, it's just this tragic story of Rosemary. But actually, I think it's important to know who Rosemary was. So like, she was just as ambitious and like sort of keen to take part as her siblings. She was like, you can see in letters that she writes to her family how much she wanted to impress her and how impress them and how important their approval was. She was particularly like fond of her dad and would like work really hard to do stuff to kind of get his approval and make him proud. So she worked really hard on like writing and literacy and get assistance from like school teachers to write stories and stuff to send to her dad. And she was constantly like in her letters right up into like her early 20s saying, I hope that I can make you happy with this, and you know, I hope that you're proud of me for doing X, Y, and Z, you know, and I hope you know I'm trying really hard and stuff like that. She really wanted their approval. She was obviously getting a lot of pressure there. But she was also like, she was really like friendly. She enjoyed arts and crafts, and in her like later teens and early 20s, when she was at these summer camps and stuff, although she needed you know, quite a lot of support when it came to like little kids, she was really like, she really enjoyed spending time with them, playing with them. She'd read to them, apparently, because she's got so many like much younger siblings. She was always trying to like help her mum with them and get involved. She obviously liked little kids.
Yeah.
Her siblings describe her as sweet, and she was really sociable and friendly and happy. She really liked getting her nails done and having her makeup and like wearing fashionable clothes, and really liked getting like complimented as well. She was always like, liked it when people told her she was pretty. She just sounds like a nice, sweet lady. But she definitely did need some extra support. So reportedly her reading and writing abilities never really got past those of the quote unquote average 12-year-old. She had poor coordination her whole life, famously tripping and like stumbling when she was presented to King George and Queen Elizabeth at royal court. She had trouble like following and understanding social etiquette, and didn't necessarily have like age appropriate behavior and reactions. She needed guidance and routine to be able to kind of stay safe and maintain her personal hygiene.
Yeah.
There's a story about her being away at some summer camp and hiding used sanitary products in her trunk because nobody had explained to her what to do with them when she was
throw them away.
Yeah, and she didn't have the cognitive sort of ability to be able to puzzle out for herself, well, I'm somewhere different, what do I do at home, and how would that translate to being somewhere different? She could verbalize, but her vocabulary was not what people expected of a young woman in high society. And she apparently had episodes of like rage and frustration that would sometimes escalate into physical aggression.
Right.
From my reading, I think that Rosemary's happiest time was in the late 1930s when her dad's political career took them to England. And this is the place where I think the kind of educational style really benefited Rosemary. So, yeah. Do you know what Montessori school is?
I think I may have heard of it a little bit. I don't know.
I want to say no, to some woman whose first name I can't remember. She was a Dr. Montessori. Basically came up with this teaching method where kids aren't grouped by age but more by like ability.
Yes. The school I went to eventually, after I'd left, reverted to that system of rather than age, do it by ability, and it worked a lot better for the children they had by the time I'd left school. So, but
the emphasis is also very much like on intuitive learning rather than like academic skills of like recalling facts and stuff like that. And it uses a lot of like natural sort of natural materials for teaching. So
it's a bit like a forest school almost, that kind of system of go and sit outside near a campfire.
There's a good amount of routine. I think it's small class sizes. I think it's very supportive. So while she was there, she had a paid companion who was like close to her age, but it just, in her letters, it sounds like she really enjoyed what she was doing. This is the place where she first started doing like the reading to the younger kids, and like taking part in like arts and crafts. And it seems like she got some supportive and really meaningful relationships while she was there. It was in like the wilds of Hertfordshire somewhere. So she'd go for walks, and she was, I think, left to be herself. There wasn't that pressure from her family.
Britain's got a lot more accessible green spaces. So, you know, you go 15 minutes from my house and there's a reservoir, you know, that kind of thing. So if you think about it in those sorts of terms, you can kind of see why. Like it's little bit of a slower, but I wouldn't say slower
yeah,
pace.
it is.
Slower pace.
It is that, I think. There's just not so much of the pressure from her family, who were,
No.
constantly being photographed by the press, and
Yeah.
living in New York and Boston and Washington. It's it's a quiet part of the UK where she's just kind of left to be herself.
Yeah, I mean, I hate it when I have to go to London for 3 days. I'm like, I need to get out. I need to go home, away from the noise. Thank you very much. So I kind of understand a little bit,
Yeah, there's a lot of. Go on, Daisy.
Go on, Dave.
I was going to say, just of course at this point, the Kennedys weren't as massively famous as they would be now. I mean, while they were well known in parts of America, essentially the dad was an ambassador.
Yeah, they didn't really know who he was here.
Yeah, and so there wasn't that same kind of, or wouldn't have been that same, constantly being followed around or anything like that. Obviously, his father would become well known in Britain very soon after, which prompted a quick exit.
Yeah, so when the Second World War started, Joe Sr. basically sent all his family back to America. He at least made the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not condescension, but he let Rosemary was the last one to leave England after everybody else had been sent back, and he let her stay at that school basically for as long as he could until he was like, oh, it's not safe anymore.
Right.
But I don't know if Daisy, if you want to talk a little bit, because I haven't. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about why Joe had to make a bit of a swift exit. I mean, it wasn't just the oncoming war. There was
a war on.
Yeah,
it was his feelings about the war, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't doing great for them. It's kind of, from what I've seen, she was sent back to the US sort of partly because, the Blitz was happening and, Britain was getting bombed an awful lot, including, as far out into the countryside as she could have been, but also because he needed to leave quite quickly.
Yeah.
Right.
He became well known for being an unusual ambassador in saying that the country that he was living in was terrible and going to lose the war, and there was no point of them even trying.
What?
He didn't want the Americans to join the war, did he?
No, he never did. He thought it was a pointless war, and that the Nazis were going to win, and so lining themselves up alongside Britain was frankly a foolish decision. He tried to set up meetings with Hitler to try and become a bit more friendly in for when the Nazis won the war. He's labelled as a Nazi sympathiser, but
basically he was sucking up a little bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He was sucking up a bit, and quite frankly, where they have described him as a Nazi sympathiser, I think that is incredibly generous.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you know what happens to Rosemary. You sort of think, yeah, I can imagine this man was perhaps more than sympathetic to Hitler's cause.
Yeah. So it's worth noting that kind of in the 30s leading up to the Second World War, having these sorts of anti-Semitic views and pro-eugenics views just across the continent and across the world really actually wasn't that unusual. It's one of those things that people don't realise about the run-up, and so they say, oh, how could the German people have let this happen? It's because it wasn't actually unusual. It's sort of, and it just kind of gradually,
and it was like a drip, wasn't it? It was kind of like a drip, 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 and then all of a sudden, oh my god, this is out of control.
Yeah. And so that in itself wasn't all that unusual.
No.
As well as the eugenics, which is why we're not surprised necessarily that he didn't want Rosemary's impairment, condition, disability, whatever you would call it, to be known, because it would, as he would put it, quote, taint the bloodline.
I was going to say there's a lot of talk about bad blood.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't sing Taylor Swift. Don't sing Taylor Swift.
The only person I think who can get away with talking about that is Taylor Swift. So
yeah. So it's kind of he didn't approve of the war at all. Didn't think they should be involved, and even when they were involved, thought they were on the wrong side of it because Britain was going to lose. And funnily enough, after a while, I mean, it took a shockingly long time for him to be sent away as the ambassador. Like, you're in Britain saying, this is a terrible war, Britain's going to lose this war, I'm just going to go over here and have a chat with Hitler. And like, they still didn't like immediately kick him out. Like,
I don't think he left until almost like the end of 1940.
So he was essentially allowed to, he wasn't kicked out at any point during this, he was like allowed to leave. Like, it was the president kind of went, do you think it might be a good idea if maybe you stopped being in Britain?
Do you want to go home now, please?
Just all of this being in Britain, this being in Britain thing isn't going great.
And you obviously
have come home.
Have you considered not being in Britain anymore?
And you obviously hate it, so why don't you come
home? Okay, so we're back with Rosemary. She's in her early 20s. She's sent to another convent school. This one's called St. Gertrude's. During this period, Rose, her mum, reports that after they came back from England, Rosemary was coming increasingly unmanageable. I've got a quote that says, she was upset easily and unpredictably.
Right.
Some of these upsets became tantrums or rages during which she broke things or hit out at people. So I think, considering how happy she had been in England, my personal feeling is that perhaps the reason that there was an increase in,
her behaviour
is because she'd been living in this place where she'd been understood and had freedom and was supported and just kind of be herself. And suddenly she's shipped back to New York and Washington, I think. And she's just, and she's suddenly under all this pressure again from her parents and from society. And
she's back in a place where she feels it's not. Yeah,
I think for somebody who liked routine and needed a bit of reassurance and probably found it a bit difficult to kind of not communicate with other people, but make her communication understood by other people. Like, I can understand why she was getting pissed off.
Completely. And on a side note, she may have realised that, English people do chocolate better. That may have helped a little bit as well, things like that. Those kinds of things. Just the lifestyle over here, I think, is better for somebody who struggles with, cognitive ability. Maybe our lifestyle over here is a bit more gentle, and I'm not just talking about the chocolate either.
I think the Kennedys were not particularly great parents or family. No. I've got another quote from Rose. Like every mother, I wanted my children to be as perfect as possible, morally, mentally, and physically. And I mean,
well, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say every mother is like that.
No, I think every good mother wants their child to be happy.
Happy, yeah, exactly. Not perfect.
Yeah. So Rose says that it was this increase in the kind of increasingly unpredictable violence and behavior that led to their decision that they made in 1941. But we're going to come back to that because I think that there is another reason behind that. And I don't know if Daisy might have some extra stuff to kind of add to this, but basically, during this point in the 20th century, it was quite widely accepted that women in particular with learning difficulties or cognitive differences were very sexually promiscuous and deviant.
Right.
And Rosemary had started sneaking out of St. Gertrude's at night and going to bars and hanging out with like undesirable young men. And so my feeling is that the real reason that what the family did to Rosemary happened is because they were worried about her getting pregnant.
Okay.
Which is wild because, like, it feels like such a square solution to a round problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like particularly when, you know, around this sort of time, like, obviously I don't think anybody should have done this, but at this time it was very common for women, and particularly disabled women, to be sterilised.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, without being told.
Yeah.
Which, you know, obviously is also terrible. Don't do that. But like, if you wanted to solve that problem, you know, it's one of those things, but it was more
than that, because
aspects.
I was going to say it was they were worried about the press finding out and the impact that would have on their family reputation, that, you know, she was going out and flirting with men. And I mean, she's beautiful, and she's 23, and she's friendly, and she's sociable. Like, she's doing the most what like any other 23-year-old woman is doing.
Will do.
Yeah.
But they are they? Well, they clearly are, aren't they? They're worried about the consequences of somebody like Rosemary falling pregnant and then being in charge of her.
No,
you know, that kind of.
That's not what they're worried about. They're worried about somebody like Rosemary getting pregnant or getting a venereal disease and the press finding out, and they don't care about Rosemary
because she is a Kennedy, not because of the the difficulties and struggles she has.
Oh yeah, they absolutely do not care about her safety or her views at all.
No.
It's even her sister Eunice even said that she thinks this is the reason why they had the surgery performed on Rosemary.
Rather than
this is
And it was one of the sisters, it may well have been Eunice as well, actually, who said that, you know, essentially she was going out looking for, you know, love and affection.
Yeah.
That she, you know, love, affection and approval that she was never getting from her parents, which is, you know, fair enough.
Yeah, to be honest.
If you don't want to hear details of what happened to Rosemary, then I suggest you skip ahead about 6.5 minutes. So in the summer of 1941, Joe Sr. started making inquiries about a fairly new surgery that was being touted as a bit of a cure-all for all manner of cognitive disabilities and mental health issues. The surgery was being peddled in Washington by Walter Freeman, and who was a doctor with no actual surgical knowledge, and his partner, who was a neurosurgeon, James W. Watts.
Okay.
This surgery was, of course, the prefrontal lobotomy. So by 1941, prefrontal lobotomies were still considered in the experimental stage. And as late as August of that year, the Journal of the American Medical Association had warned people about having it because it was getting increasingly negative press. There was a lot of talk about the brutality of the surgeons and the dangerous and unpredictable outcomes. It said that Joe consulted with his family about the possibility of having Rosemary lobotomized. Her younger sister, Kathleen, who was working at a newspaper at the time, apparently spoke to a journalist friend of hers who'd been writing stories about lobotomies and other treatments being used on mentally ill and cognitively impaired people. And his response to Kathleen was that Following the surgery, patients don't worry so much, but they're gone as a person, just gone.
Oh my God.
But Freeman was a strong salesman, and a lot of the US press were writing stories about, the benefits of this life-changing surgery. Ultimately, Joe decided that Rosemary would have the operation, although he supposedly didn't tell Rose about it until after it had happened. Personally,
What? Whoa! But just back up a bit there. He didn't tell his wife
that he was having his daughter lobotomized. Apparently, I personally don't buy it, because
I was just gonna use the worst swear word going, but look.
And I don't buy it. I think for that woman, she was so controlling and involved in. I find it very hard to believe that she didn't know.
What? So he did. What did he do? Did he take the heat when it all came out that we've had her lobotomized? So he went. Don't blame my wife. It was my decision. That kind of.
It didn't come out until after he was dead.
Okay.
So
how did they explain it? Look.
I will tell you in a minute.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. But I think that Rose basically decided that she'd rather, despite all the bad and Joe, all the bad things that they'd heard, they decided they'd rather have like a compliant daughter with no sort of personality than just Rosemary as who she was. So this is my big content warning. I went back and forth here, like we've talked about it in messages and
production meetings.
And I've been uncertain about how graphic to get in the description of what happened to Rosemary. I don't want to. I've called it surgery throughout this, but I think surgery's not really the appropriate term for what happened to her. I think what they did, this procedure was torture. It was tested on cadavers. There was no real trials before they moved into actually doing these procedures on humans. And the feedback from Watts and Freeman was really sporadic and vague.
Of course.
If you want to find out about prefrontal lobotomies, there is really graphic descriptions out there. And if you want the really gory details about Rosemary's specific procedure, they are in almost everything that I read.
They're really present. You will fall over the descriptions of them.
Yeah.
It's just everywhere.
Yeah. I think that is also sad as well, isn't it, really? That you Google her name and then they're everywhere. That is the one thing she's known for. Is just
the most
awful.
Documented part of her life.
And that's why I've decided not to go into a lot of detail here. I don't think it's right, because I think it sensationalizes what happened.
Yeah, we're not here to make it glitz and glamour, are we?
And actually, this story is one of the most upsetting things I've ever read. Like if I'm ever, this is the episode where I cry and Lucy swears, because this is rough. So yeah, I'm going to give you an idea about.
If I swear, I'm sorry, Mum, but sometimes you just need to, don't you? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rosemary's lobotomy involved drilling holes either side of her skull and inserting a metal instrument into those holes. The purpose of doing this is to sever the connective tissue between the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain which is responsible for social behavior, emotional responses, working memory, long-term decision making, and like language and speech. And so severing the part of the brain that connects that part with the part of the brain that's responsible for motor skills and senses. The intended result of the surgery is to help make
help in air quotes there.
It's to make people easier to control. They'd have less self-awareness, they'd have slower responses and a dull emotional range. Rosemary was awake during the surgery. She would have had a local anaesthetic, but she would have likely been very distressed by the instruments used, the noises, and the sensations of what was being done to her, even if she wasn't feeling any actual pain. During the procedure, Watts and Freeman talked to Rosemary. They asked her to recite the Lord's Prayer and sing God Save America. And when Rosemary's speech became slurred and incoherent, they stopped cutting. It didn't take very long to carry out the procedure, and afterwards Rosemary was sent to a hospital to recover. It became quickly apparent that the surgery had left Rosemary unable to walk, speak, or move one of her arms. She was sent to a private rehab clinic, favoured by the rich and famous, where she stayed for about 7 years. So that's what Rosemary's family put her through physically. The emotional trauma will carry on, though. So how are we all doing?
I am a podcaster and I am lost for words. It is, and I'm going to cry.
Yeah, no, I am.
That is like taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut, isn't it, really? Do you know what I mean? The reasoning we think and believe that she had that lobotomy are, you know, they are easy. I don't care what how challenging that person is or how difficult it may be to get over that challenge. It is, but what they essentially did was they destroyed her soul, if you ask me. That is what they did, because like the you know, her sister, who was the journalist, said, you know, she had conversations with people that said they're gone, they're not there anymore. You are taking away somebody's personality, somebody's soul, just so that they can behave in a way that you see fit. And I'm sorry, you wouldn't treat an animal like that.
They decided that their reputation was more important than Rosemary's whole being.
Yeah. To them, she was an annoyance and would be better off, you know, she wasn't a person, she was a problem. Yeah. And they wanted to solve that problem. And do you know, I would much rather have a loving family who understood me around me than fame, fortune, and what anybody else thought of me, for Christ's sake.
When I was reading this, no, while I was reading this, you know, and knowing the political power that the Kennedys still have, and I thought I hated Donald Trump for the things he did to vast communities of people, but I think it takes a special kind of arrogance and sadism to do that to your child in your own interest.
Completely.
Yeah.
Blimey. Daisy, I think we're both speechless. You might have to take the next 15 minutes while we just compose ourselves, because I might start swearing and kicking off. I feel like I need to go and kick a bin very, very hard.
Yeah, see, my current problem here is that I have things that I think are interesting, but it's hard to tell whether I think they're interesting because as a person, I don't have feelings, really.
Yes, you do.
No, go on, let's hear him. We'll tell you if you have feelings or not.
Yeah,
we're on the edge, so like if you see us crying, you know to stop.
Yeah. I'll take myself off somewhere and give myself an interesting talk. One of these things is that these two doctors who did go around doing all of these surgeries, destroying people's lives, is that they were weirdly the first people to diagnose Rosemary with a mental illness rather than a cognitive impairment, which is something that now people are thinking more, that she more likely had a mental illness, at least as well as.
Yeah.
And it was because they didn't perform this surgery on people who had a learning disability or a cognitive impairment, or they only performed this operation on people who they determined to be mentally ill.
It was depressed wives and lesbians, wasn't it, basically?
Yeah, so for example, it seems that their diagnosis of Rosemary as having a mental illness rather than anything else was for convenience, so that they could perform this surgery.
Yeah, do you think as well, Daisy, that it was almost like, well, yeah, she doesn't really fit our criteria, but on the other hand, she is a Kennedy. It would be great for our marketing to say we've even operated on people in high society.
Yeah, look what we did for her.
Yeah.
So I mean, they were still operating within the medical establishment, and it was still pretty recent. They were still doing this in the 40s. The guy who invented this procedure won a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
They weren't like hucksters on the corner of the street who were they were still bound by the laws that would mean that they had to do patient confidentiality and that sort of thing. They no doubt Joe turned up with a very nice large amount of money for them to do it. However, I don't think it seems that in itself wouldn't have been a motivation for them to perform a surgery where they wouldn't otherwise have done. I think they did genuinely believe that it could help.
It could help, okay.
But I think
I'm just cynical.
Yeah. I think the difference is that a mental illness was seen as something that could potentially be cured. In a way that even then, I think, they considered, someone who was born with a cognitive impairment, learning disability, these sorts of issues. Realistically, I think they knew the chances of that ever being, fixed wasn't really the case. And so, if they could make them less docile by saying that, they also had, I don't know, mega depression, then that could help people out. It's kind of one of the baffling things about this procedure is how often it just did nothing. We hear a lot about how tragic and awful it goes, like with Rosemary, and just half of the time, just nothing happened.
Yep.
I really am lost for words. I really am.
Yeah, and the fact they got a Nobel Prize as well is one of those. It makes me feel like, like when they give someone an award for like a big TV show or a big film they've done or something, and then the next, about 6 weeks later, they say something really racist on Twitter.
Yes.
And you have to go, shit, we can't take that back.
It's a bit like when the Queen gives out an OBE to Jimmy Savile, and you're like,
Yeah.
Can't do anything about that now.
It's like we can't give them an anti-BAFTA. Like, that's not a thing. You can't take. I mean, can you take back a Nobel Prize?
I don't know.
I've never personally tried.
No.
So.
They should come with a receipt, shouldn't they? Really?
There should definitely be like not a returns guarantee, but no, we can take this is a behavior dependent. We will take this back from you. Yeah.
I've just Googled it. It is not possible to revoke a Nobel Peace Prize. Maybe another prize.
I don't know how we're coming out of this still laughing. I mean, that's testimony to our friendship, isn't it? Really.
I've got something. It's awful, but in a slightly more hilarious way. So you ready for a bit of a tonal shift?
Ready? Right, yeah. Let's. Yep.
So after leaving the fancy rehab place, Rosemary was sent to another institution where she would spend the rest of her life. This place was called St. Colette's School for Backwards Children.
Okay, that's a new term. I've never. Well, yeah, backwards.
Apparently, they changed it some years later when one of the kids pointed out that they do not actually walk backwards, and it became known as the school for special achieving magic babies or some nonsense.
That sounds better. I would go to a special achieving magic baby school.
Yeah. I think all of these school names, they sound like it's the title of a young adult book series.
I was going to say, it's basically Hogwarts, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like one from a series of unfortunate events.
Yes. Hogwarts, but with that horrible, grim reality. Because apparently losing both your parents before you're one is not a grim enough reality.
Hogwarts with no wands.
Okay, so this was a place where basically children and adults with learning difficulties, cognitive impairments lived full time. Jo commissioned for Rosemary to have her own cottage along with her own private swimming pool built.
So basically, he's butchered her and then gone, you can have a cottage with a swimming pool.
Rosemary's family were told that their sister was living as a recluse somewhere, and the press were told that she was a kindergarten teacher who wanted a quiet, private life away from, the public eye. So apparently not even the family really knew what had happened to Rosemary.
I mean, oh man. Oh.
Rosemary's siblings and her mum did not visit Rosemary in her new home until after Jo died in 1969.
And then what happened then? What were they like? Like, oh crap, what's happened to you, Rosemary? Like,
oh no, they found out after he died. But
yeah, I know. But then, like, what? Like, when they went to see her, they were like, shit. Like,
they didn't see her for 20 years, and I'm convinced that Rose at least knew what had happened to her daughter, knew how badly it had gone.
How can she live with herself? How did she live with herself? Because, like you say, Alice, I am of the school of thought as you. She must have known that. What did they say? That she was what did he say to the kids and his wife?
He told the kids that she was a recluse, and that and they obviously knew that she had health problems. And I think he basically said, look, we've institutionalized her somewhere for her own good. You can't go and see her.
I'm sorry, that's bollocks. I'm sorry to use it. I don't know what's happening in this episode, but like we're living in a parallel universe. But that is bollocks. You can't say to your wife and your other children, Rosemary's decided she wants to be a recluse. Because if my mom said that to me about my sister, your sister wants to be a recluse, I'd be like, no, she doesn't. What? Like,
I was going to say, when you know that your sister's sociable and happy.
Exactly. Wouldn't you go, what? You'd ask questions, not just sit there and go, all right then, Dad, yeah, fine, fair enough.
I think that family was so controlled by their parents. That family's
weird. If you ask me, that family's weird. Sorry.
They were so controlled by their parents. Like, the fact that even the wife didn't go and visit her for, like, Rosemary had a lobotomy in 1941 and her mum didn't see her again until 1969.
It's just disgraceful.
Yeah. So the implication that I've had from the things that I've read is that essentially it was the decision of the two parents to separate her from the family. That Rose did know where she was, but the children genuinely didn't. So when one of them was running for office, I'm assuming it was
Jack.
Yeah, probably Jack, because he would have been
running for office in the late 50s, wouldn't he?
Yeah, so this is the 60s, so this may have been JFK, actually.
Yeah, that's who Jack is.
Making up names for people. I don't care that it's his actual name.
It's just like, what? You're confusing me.
Yeah.
His name was John Jack Kennedy.
Yeah, just call him John. No,
but nobody calls him John. People call him Jack or JFK.
No, we call him John F. Kennedy.
Anyway,
you're just calling it random Jack. Like,
all right. So Stephen.
President Stephen Kennedy.
Yeah.
We'll call him John from now on.
Yeah, so when he was running for office, they did have to explain where she was. And at that point, they didn't say that she'd been institutionalized because she'd had a lobotomy. They just said that she was mentally retarded, and so she was living elsewhere. So
I mean, that in itself is disgusting. That,
well, yeah, but
you know,
but I would imagine that the children didn't know where she was, but they had been told that she had been institutionalized because they hadn't been necessarily told of the surgery, but that just that she was living elsewhere. They definitely did tell all of the press and everything when they were asking questions that she was I think they said that she was in the Midwest, which, as we all know, is American for far away.
To nowhere.
Far away, you can never go there. It's
a bit like when you say you sent the dog to the farm, you know that, you know.
Yeah, it was, off in Timbuktu.
Oh, man.
Rosemary's life at St. Colette's doesn't seem like it was so bad. I mean, it sounds like she was probably quite happy there. I think it's incredibly ironic that the life that she went on to live at St. Colette's is probably the life that she would have lived if they'd left her at that Montessori school in England or found her somewhere similar and just left her alone. But now, because she'd had a lobotomy, she needed much more support, different kinds of support. So in her cottage, she had 2 live-in carers who were nuns, obviously.
Yeah.
She needed help with like personal care. I believe she was incontinent now. She had difficulty moving around, lot of difficulty with verbal communication. And
could she understand what was going on around her? Was she able to
an extent? She and her challenging behaviors and impulse control got even worse.
Of course he did.
Yeah. So a new head doctor arrived at some point and changed Rosemary's medication after she'd been there. I think this was the early 60s, so she'd been there sort of 10 years. And apparently her verbal communication improved, but her speech and her cognition, she had a lot of difficulty understanding the passage of time. She would refer to herself as a baby, saying things like, baby doesn't like that. She'd get confused by her sort of siblings seeming like having aged.
Right.
She did regain the ability to walk, but she dragged one foot. I think it sounds like she wasn't able to like lift it and move it forward a step.
Like it was heavy.
And I couldn't find a clear answer as to whether she actually was able to fully regain the use of her arm, but there are references to her like swimming and stuff again, so I'm assuming she must have done.
Yeah, even if it's only slightly.
Yeah, she doggy paddled apparently.
So I've seen it described as palsied.
Okay. Yeah. She enjoyed swimming a lot. She had a private pool, and then her family also built like an indoor pool for the whole like institution, so that she could continue to swim in the wintertime, because her institution was in Wisconsin, which I don't think is known for being warm. She liked food and eating, and all the stories about her like later in life, they're all around like festive dinners and gatherings at the dinner table.
Alice, are we now talking about the life of Lucy Wood?
Well, were you having big festive dinners with nuns?
No, but I do cry over my Christmas dinner. It makes me very emotional in a good way because food is so nice.
Hold on. You're saying that something ridiculous makes you cry. What a surprise.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just dead inside. Maybe that's what it is.
Maybe.
And she also later in her life, she spent a lot of time with her sister Eunice and her sister's kids, and even like right up until her death, she was really involved. Her Eunice and Eunice's family were very involved in Rosemary. I think she was the one she was closest to.
Okay.
And Rosemary also had a little dog called Lolly, which I like because I call Lola that sometimes, who she apparently really loved. And one of her favourite things to do was to encourage Lolly to get up on the furniture and then tell her off for being on the furniture.
Right, okay. So the dog was living in a permanent, like, confused state of,
I guess so.
what do you want me to do, woman? What?
But she was really fond of her dog, apparently.
Well, who doesn't like dogs? I mean,
Yeah, that's certainly my feelings about it.
this is where Daisy says she hates dogs.
No, I'm good with dogs. I just generally prefer cats.
Don't tell Lola, but that's how I feel as well.
Oh, controversial.
So I'll tell you a little bit about what happened to Rosemary when she saw her mum for the first time after 20 years. So obviously Joe Sr. was dead, and they took Rosemary to go and visit Rose. Rose didn't come and see her. They took Rosemary to visit her, or possibly she's picking her up from the airport. Anyway, their first reunion happens in an airport, and Rosemary sees her mum and recognizes her like across the way, and she runs off from the nuns who are with her. And she's got mobility issues, so I can't imagine she's moving at light speed, but she gets away from these nuns and she's running towards her mum, and her mum's like slow motion arms spread, ready to embrace her daughter again after 20 years. And upon getting to her, Rosemary starts yelling and punching her mum. So the book I read, they were like, that's because Rosemary knew how long it'd been since she'd seen her mum.
Well, you didn't punch her. Like, I've never met you, Alice, but I can assure you that when we all get together for our first team meeting, I won't punch you in the face. Like, nice to see you, Alice. Smack, smack, smack. Like,
yeah, I reckon.
Is this why I have so few friends?
No, I reckon Rosemary was like, you fucking did this to me. She knew that she'd been betrayed by her parents. I think you did this to me implies.
And what kind of idiot stands there, Rose, stands there going, oh, come here, darling, let me give you a cuddle. Like, I've not seen you for 20 years. How lovely to see you. Thinking that she's not going to know a damn thing about what's happened to her. Yeah. Oh, this makes me cross.
Yeah,
Where is that woman's self-awareness? You know what I mean?
Yeah. She stayed close to the rest of us. She was close with her siblings. And actually, even, before she was lobotomized, it sounds like her siblings did kind of, they just saw her as Rosemary. They would take her brothers would take her to dances as like a date, so because they knew that she wouldn't be able, there was no guys who were going to ask her. And, I think they cared about her. By the time she eventually passed away, Rosemary lived into her 80s. She outlived both of her older brothers. She also outlived her sister Kathleen, who was only 18 months younger than her. Kathleen, another testament to the wonderful parenting skills of Rose and Joe Jr. Kathleen was ostracized by her parents after marrying a Protestant, and he died tragically. He was British. He was a Duke. He died tragically while during the war, and then she died in a plane crash and was buried with her husband in England with very little ceremony from her family. And then, of course, her brother.
As parenting goes, that is tip top, isn't it? Really?
Mm-hmm. It's checking all those boxes,
all of them.
And they had such a bad track record with like them all dying.
Oh yeah.
Like,
and then
so
Bobby gets assassinated.
Yeah.
It's like, I know in the olden days you had a lot of kids because they weren't supposed to make it past infancy, but this was the 20s, 30s, 40s. Like these. That's not the reason they had a lot of kids.
You could have easily gone and had played a game of cards or read a book or something, couldn't you? Really?
I read somewhere somebody, I think it might even have been Rose herself, said, "Oh, what happened to Rosemary was like the start of the tragedy of their family."
And this is why I believe in karma.
There's a lot of talk in the books about like all the good that has come out of what happened to Rosemary and what her family did to her. And like, I think maybe, you know, that's all worth talking about sometime, like the Paralympics and stuff. Well, hey, but
the Special Olympics rather than the Paralympics.
Special
See,
Olympics,
I hate that word. I don't like that word.
No.
It's very much an Americanism, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't want to end my story by talking about what like the good that supposedly came out of what happened to Rosemary, because I think that just brushes it under the rug. I think this is a huge injustice, and I think the message I took away from this story is about the damage of the social pressures and the family abuse of this woman. This isn't about changes that, you know, that JFK got in place when he was president, or what Eunice did with the Special Olympics. This is about what they did to her because they couldn't control. They decided they'd rather rob her of her personality than her individual, and then have a child who's different. And I think
we have all grown up, haven't we? All three of us here have grown up with families that have loved us and have encouraged us, and to them, our differences make our differences and difficulties make no difference at all. We are still loved the same as our siblings were. You know, we are still cared about. We, you know, all that kind of thing. And I cannot imagine what it must be like to live with a family who don't give a shit, do not give a shit about you, and all they want to do is save face. That's what this is. This is them saving face, and we don't want anything that makes us look weird. Can I just tell you that being different is not a bad thing at all. In fact, it makes you a more interesting person, if you ask me.
And the Kennedys are still thought of by a lot of people as like this fucking great white hope for liberal America. And I just think I cannot forgive the entire, you know, dynasty for this. This is huge, egregious betrayal of their daughter. There's absolutely no, you know, there's no
saving grace, is there?
I
can see why.
For that.
No.
There's no amount of good works, I think, that make that better.
Well, no, I mean, the good work seem to have, very much been to kind of, assuage the guilt, particularly of the children, which I call them the children. You know, the siblings of Rosemary. I mean, they're not children, are they? They're all born in like the 20s.
I was going to say most of them are dead now, but
yeah. But the thing is, I think I do kind of believe that they didn't have a full understanding of what had happened to their sister, just because of how things were at that time. But for what it's worth, Eunice herself, this is the daughter who founded the Special Olympics, from like a summer's day out in her backyard. Mm-hmm. She has said herself that it wasn't
because of Rosemary.
No, that there's probably an element of that in there somewhere, but she said herself that it was very simplistic. It's just assume it was all down to that.
I wasn't going to talk about this, but there is a part of me that Joe Senior, he had a stroke in 1963 or something, and it left him ultimately at the end of his life. He was is paraplegic the right word? He had essentially no movement, I think, from the neck down.
Yeah. Is it paraplegic? Yeah, it is.
I think it's technically
tetraplegia. Yeah.
That high.
The spine and the neck. Yeah.
He couldn't speak. He could not communicate verbally, and he was completely incontinent. He had to rely on others for all of his personal care, and he used to get really frustrated and really angry that people wouldn't understand him, and he'd gone from being this powerful man to relying on all these other people. And that quote about that he made about dollars shining like dollars or being dull. There's a thing he says at the end of that quote is maybe it's the hand of God. And I've seeing what happened to him, I think, no, mate, that is fucking karma. Like, I'm not saying that people who live, you know, without movement and people who can't communicate, that it's not a life worth living. But I hope that he got a glimpse into how difficult it is and how frustrating it is, and how Rosemary will have had to fight her whole life to be heard. I hope when he died, I hope he fucking knew what he'd done to his daughter.
And there is an element, isn't there, of, you know, with him having a stroke, he would have probably been sat there with his own thoughts because he couldn't communicate them.
I hope so.
Of oh my God, that realization of this can happen. This is what I always say, isn't it, though, Alice? You know, disability can happen to anybody at any time. You know, you could get run over by a bus tomorrow, God forbid, and you could have been like an athlete and all this sort of stuff. You could get run over by a bus and still end up. You could have a stroke like he did, and you could still end up disabled. And whenever I say that, even when I'm trying to educate people, it sounds like a threat. It's never meant to sound like a threat, but it's true. It's the truth.
You could become disabled any minute if you piss me off enough.
I was going to say, Lucy's secretly learning to drive a bus.
I know exactly that bit on the ankle that could bring you to your knees. That kind of thing. But it's just like, you know, there by the grace of God, really. That's what it is.
So that is
can I just say the Kennedys piss me off. End of discussion.
And so much of what I read, like, is written by people who clearly love the Kennedys even now. Like, there's so much arse licking in the publications, and, you know, people. One of the main source for this, there's a point in it where the woman goes, "Oh." Rose says something or another, and then the author reflects and says, "Oh, clearly, Rosemary's lobotomy was as hard on Rose as it was on Rosemary."
What? Don't even.
I nearly punched my iPad. It was just. I don't think my mum uses this phrase where she says, "I'm so angry I could spit." And I think that is the first time I've ever really felt a visceral connection to that
venom,
phrase.
isn't it?
Yeah, I was so angry.
Yeah, I think with them, it's one of these things that, you know, because so many of them died at times they would have considered, you know, untimely. They didn't have a chance to become unpopular towards the end of their term, you know, most of the other presidents and politicians in general. And, you know, they're held up as kind of, you know, the highest standard of American politicians because, you know, they sort of were, because they were only there for about 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really difficult to piss off the entire country in that amount of time.
Yeah.
So that was Rosemary.
Well, that's been a really heavy. We were going to do this history lesson in one sitting, weren't we? But this has been a very heavy episode, and there's a lot to digest. I'm quite angry. And I think me chiming in with Horatio Nelson, you know, suffering with chronic seasickness, is taking away somewhat what we've just talked about. So I think we're going to split these two history episodes and we'll just release like one in
I think that's a good shout. This is a pretty long one, so
and it will give me more of a chance to research and actually understand the French Revolutionary Wars.
Brilliant. So we will see you next time for another edition of the lABLEd podcast with a history lesson featuring Daisy Holder.
And in the meantime, head over to our GoFundMe. We would like to be able to pay all the people who do all the hard work behind the scenes, i.e. Adam, who bends over backwards for us on top of doing his full-time job, and us three just chat nonsense for an hour and cry. So guys, follow us on all of the things, and if you've got some spare pennies, please chuck them our way.
Thanks very much for your time, Daisy. I know that's been very heavy. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the lABLEd podcast. If you like the show, please rate, review and subscribe. You can follow us on social media at lABLEd Podcast.
Thanks go to our editor Adam Hall, our music composer Maisie Crunden, and our graphic designer Sarah Coley.
We'll see you next time.